webinar on building the green supply chain. Today, this is your host, Flora Ciceri, founder of Supply Chain Insight, and I'm joined today with John Davies of GreenBiz. Before I get started with the webinar, let me just go through some basic fundamentals. All of the slides that you'll see today will be available on SlideShare. It is our mission to share research openly, and this joint study that has been in the development by both GreenBiz and Supply Chain Research from Supply Chain Insights will be shared freely through open content research on SlideShare. As you have questions, we will be taking any questions from the Q&A panel. Just put them in, and John and I will include them in our conversation. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to make this a dialogue. Secondly, the Twitter hashtag for this webinar is SCI Webinar, and we're active on Twitter and would love to hear your voice as we go along. So with that, let's get started. The green supply chain. You know, supply chain management has been around for 30 years, but the process of the right product, right place, right time, and still saving the planet, those concepts are about a decade old. Today, I'd like to welcome John Davies. John is the Vice President and Senior Analyst at GreenBiz, and he facilitates an executive network. John, you want to share a little bit about your background?
Sure, Laura. Thanks, and thanks everyone for attending this morning. As Laura knows, I was in supply chain for a long time in terms of helping people automate supply chains, and then probably 8 years ago started working on sustainability and corporate social responsibility issues when Laura and I worked together at AMR Research, and now I work with GreenBiz Group. And you can see a lot of our work around sustainability, corporate social responsibility, really focused on business to business, business to consumer, but, you know, the greening of corporate America, if you will, at www.greenbiz.com. Laura, let's get started.
Okay. Unfortunately, Keith Holliday won't be with us today. Keith has had a medical emergency, and he asked me to give some highlights of the piece that he was going to share about Sunoco products. And then, John, I'd like for you to share, you know, some stories that you know before we go into the research. You know, one of the questions I get a lot is people say, you know, Laura, I'd love to be more sustainable, but I am just an old-fashioned company. I've got assets, you know, I don't necessarily have the leadership that is in tune with corporate social responsibility initiatives. And I'd ask Keith to join us today, and he's actually done a podcast that I'll be sure is attached with this. And unfortunately, he's had a very serious medical emergency, and he won't be with us, so he's in my prayers. But Sunoco Products was founded in 1899, and it's a $4.8 billion global provider of consumer packaging. You may not know the name Sunoco, but you may recognize the packaging because it's found on things like Pringles cans or M&M wrappers. And so they operate 340 operations within 85 countries. Now, what I love about Keith's story is that he has worked through sales and operations planning and also through metrics that matter to really drive sustainability improvements while also driving supply chain results. And I like to think that we aren't talking about an or condition, supply chain or sustainability. I like to think about it as an and condition. And it's this story that I think Keith has done through the design of supply chain for push-pull decoupling points and really being able to look at agility and discipline and to be able to look at the measurement of the corporate social responsibility through design. Last week I was at a conference and we were talking about supply chain design, and you know, we were moving past just physical design of, you know, how many DCs do I have, and you know, how do I move trucks, to really being able to look at flows of design of push-pull decoupling points and carbon monitoring and water, and how do we demanufacture, or how do we manage the life cycle. And so Keith's, I think, a great case study of being able to drive that and condition to be able to drive quarter after quarter cash dividends to shareholders while also being able to improve green. John, any other case studies come to mind for you where we've seen this and condition like this?
Well, I think there are a lot of them, typically, and we didn't really get into this in the research, sustainability organizations within companies tend to be fairly small. And so their accomplishments come by working with other organizations within a firm. And so I think one story that comes to mind is when companies focus on waste reduction, which any good supply chain executive should embrace. And DuPont Building Materials, one division of DuPont, had a goal to go from and I don't have the numbers right at the tip of my tongue, but had a goal to go to zero waste. And what they had to do was look at the entire supply chain or value chain and determine where they could change materials either in sourcing or how to eliminate the waste that came with production. And what they found is, in a lot of cases, that by going with supply chain execs and product designers, that some of the waste that they were generating could be used as input to other products that they manufactured, and some of the excess that came out of production could actually go as an input to other companies. So this partnering across the value chain so that their waste became an input to other companies' manufacturing process. And I think, sorry, go ahead, Laura.
And I think the Wells Blue Bunny case study we had last year, where we had a case study where Wells wanted high dairy fats, and the yogurt producers wanted to use dairy solids, and they created the value network to be able to use all the streams from the milk production. But, John, as we are going to look at the results from our study, we don't see many companies looking holistically at the supplier base like that. Any thoughts before we continue?
No, let's get into research, and then we can sort of discuss some of the reasons for that observation, and maybe offer some possible solutions to people on the webcast.
Okay, awesome. And again, please put your questions in the conversation bar at the bottom where it says Q&A, and we'll take them as we go along. So we partnered with GreenBiz to do the study, and this study is still open. And it is on our website, and we also will put it on LinkedIn and actually share the link for the study as we send you the recording from this webinar. So if you want to share it with others in the industry, we would love to have your help. The study will close in 2 weeks. And what we're trying to do is to understand what is the sentiment, or how are things changing in the world of the green supply chain and the relationship between the supply chain officer and the sustainability organization. The study was done through a quantitative study, and there were actually 2 waves. Wave 1 was January 15th through February 20th in 2013, and Wave 2 was conducted recently, March 12th through June 22nd of 2014. In each of the waves, we've had over 60 respondents, and what we're trying to do is to understand where are we on the goals and where are we on the brand promise as it ties to sustainability. Now, the demographics of the study, most of the folks that are in the studies for both years are manufacturing folks. They will actually have deep roots in manufacturing processes. And both years, the study has been deeper with those that are in the process industries. And just let me spend a minute and talk a little bit about how do we discern what a discrete industry is from a process industry. The discrete industries are typically make-to-order. The process industries are typically make-to-stock or more flow manufacturing. So you can see that our study does cover a range of industries, but it's predominantly process manufacturing, chemical, paper, consumer packaged goods, food and beverage, and those that are dealing with flow. Now, the demographics of the study, we're trying to understand the perspective between two groups of individuals within the organization. The supply chain management team, and of course, supply chain looks very different in different organizations, and the corporate social responsibility team. And so we're trying to contrast the views of these two audiences to understand where we are on the green supply chain. And again, the 2014 study is still open, and we're hoping to be able to get more of the supply chain group to take the study and to be able to make more comparisons. So let's share with where we're at today. You know, as we look at supply chain issues and we ask people, within your company, the single largest pain point in the supply chain at this point in time, and it's rising commodity prices. And we can see that demand volatility, rising commodity prices are rising to the top. But corporate social responsibility is pretty low. You know, we have a lot of talk, but you know, often when push comes to shove, it's the other things in the business that are clouding our ability to drive corporate social responsibility. And John, I just want to take a minute here and ask your opinion. Why do you think this is so? Why do you think it ranks so low in the list of priorities?
Well, I think, Laura, part of it may be that it's just definitional for supply chain executives and you know, when they're responding to this and looking at what does sustainability do within their company, because we find a lot of focus of sustainability and CSR groups on the very issue that's number one on your list, which is rising commodity prices. And so it may, in fact, be the way in which we're talking about this, because they're very much involved, and you've covered this before, around conflict minerals and having a secure supply chain to guarantee that, you know, minerals aren't being extracted with slave labor in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Another issue that comes up for these sustainability executives are around water. So in California, you know, the agricultural supply chain is a big issue for them, but I don't think that they look at that issue as purely a CSR issue, but more, you know, sort of CSR influencing and discussing about commodity prices as well.
Well, you know, I agree. And John, you know, when I look at the work we've been doing on the Supply Chain Index, which is a way to measure supply chain improvement, I smile looking at the progress of the companies that I know have made corporate social responsibility a priority. I mean, I love the progress that Unilever's made in the 4 years. You know, I love the progress that Patagonia's made. And I can't help but think that, you know, the corporate sustainability focus makes them better planners, better at working on commodities and managing the supplier base. And I just think it matters. And, you know, I think it's a great opportunity to get at some of these other big issues.
Yeah, you know, calling out Unilever is a great example, and you know, their number one competitor, Procter & Gamble, they both have very strong programs. The difference may be the public leadership of Paul Pullman at Unilever, so vehemently stating that, you know, I'm not going to be driven by quarterly results. We're going to have long-term plans. That's really important, I think, both for supply chain success and success in their sustainability focus. And I think for them, both as consumer brands, they're looking long-term at the right to operate and serving around the world. So you have this huge middle class that's going to rise, and they see that by being stewards of, watersheds and demonstrating their stewardship of the environment, that this will be beneficial to them in terms of, future sales. It's definitely driven by the green of money, not just altruism.
Yeah. Well, let's get into the study. So in our study in 2014, and you can compare here the 2 years of the study. So the left hand is the results from 2013, and the right is results from 2014. And this is a bar chart, and, there's not a significant difference in this response. On average, we've had corporate sustainability goals for 6 to 7 years. And you can see that companies that have had them for a long time, more than 10 years, are about a third of the group. And these typically are companies that ran into problems and quickly determined that sustainability was important. Dow Chemical was an early leader in the definition of corporate sustainability goals, as was Procter & Gamble. And then you can see other companies have had them less than 5 years. So when we look at the definition of goals, and I find this particularly interesting, John, because, the supply chain can be your company only. And, in 2013, we found that 42% of companies were looking at your company only. And then in 2014, we actually are starting to see some of the shifts out into the value network, which I find really exciting because, we can't really get there without redefining procurement to drive value. And if you look at supply chain over the last 30 years, we've consistently pushed cost and waste back on the supplier base, elongated payables by at least 30 days, and not really designed for value. So, John, I find this chart really exciting. Thoughts here?
Oh, I agree with you, and I think this may be one of the bigger sort of findings in the research. There are a couple examples that I think come to play here, and they're consumer-facing companies, but it's happening in the business-to-business world as well. I think with this focus on the value network this year, just a couple of months ago, McDonald's made several announcements around their sustainability goals, and one of those goals was to start procurement of sustainable beef in 2016. And I think for a number of people, the concept of sustainable beef almost seems like an oxymoron. How can beef be sustainable? But they're not going to get out of the hamburger business, and so they're partnering both up and down the value chain with growers, for beef, for cattle, with the cattlemen, with ranchers, and also with industry partners like the National Cattlemen's Association and their partners, people like Golden State Foods. And they also say that in order to make all of this actually work, they also need their customers to be involved in this dialogue. And so it's a big bet on across all the value chain. And another just quick example, again, I'm using food examples because they have this long chain that's fairly interesting, is Miller Coors working with their barley farmers, in Idaho and Montana to make sure that they're using sustainable agricultural practices and being stewards of the watersheds where the farming is done, and then working on the other hand with Walmarts and Kroger's and others of the retail side to really get their messaging through. So if you see anything about Miller Coors, you'll always see down in the corner, great beer, great responsibility, and that's partly their social responsibility aspect of that.
John, you're kind enough to facilitate the corporate sustainability panel at our upcoming conference in September, and I think you've got a great group of people on that panel. We've got Kroger, who's talking about reclamation of waste and being able to turn food products into gas for their trucks. And we've got Cisco talking about the management of the life cycle of products end to end and demanufacturing and their work with suppliers. And we've got HP, who is a leader in the definition of supplier scorecards, talking about the work with government and infrastructure and railways and, designing for value. And I think those are three great case studies of value and, being able to look at the value network holistically. It gives me hope, John, that we can get outside of our four walls and really start to look at value. Do you have any insights about how people can start that journey?
Well, before I say how they can start the journey, let me just talk about a couple of the panelists. I think I used a couple of consumer, examples with McDonald's and Miller Coors, but, when you take a company like HP, one of the things we're seeing in the business-to-business part of their commerce is a sort of race to the top by these electronics companies, and that we're seeing a pull from their corporate customers saying that we want better products that are more sustainable. We want you to reduce the packaging that you're sending to us. So there's a pull from their customers, and even in RFPs we're seeing that there's a desire for more sustainable product, more energy efficient product. So I think we'll have a really exciting conversation with HP and Cisco on the one hand, talking about how that is manifesting itself in their businesses, and then with Kroger in terms of how that's changing their logistics network and the type of vehicles they're using to transport goods to the stores. As far as how people can start, it really depends upon the corporate culture. So some few people are lucky enough to have someone like Paul Pullman on top who's saying we want to be as green as possible, with Unilever and measure our impact. I think for people in supply chain, you do a lot of the things that you've normally done, maybe with just a slightly different environmental or social lens to it. And so, it's about eliminating waste. It's about being leaner. And so I think if they take that, but say, look at it from an environmental, social perspective, they may get some new insights as to how to improve their bottom lines.
Well, John, sometimes people in supply chain feel like they're sort of at the bottom of the heap, right? That, they work hard and people don't care. And I actually think this gives us a new opportunity to pull up the chair at the table and talk about redesigning for value versus just pushing cost and waste back on the supplier base. As I look at this slide, I think about the great work that General Mills has done. One of the opportunities for creating a value network at General Mills was being able to work with retailers around the transportation network and the carbon footprint, the packaging footprint. And they've done some great work on network design with retailers designing for value. And I find more and more partners don't just want to have the old traditional buy-sell discussion, that they want to have supply chain design and design of flows and design for value at the table. And I think it's a great opportunity for supply chain leaders to be able to have a chair to pull up at the table when we've been wanting to do that for a long time. So I find this chart especially exciting.
Oh, I definitely agree. And I think one other thing, I guess tip that I would say to people is, to get together with your peers. And I've moderated a few different sessions like this where a few companies will get together with their supply chain people and their sustainability teams and just spend a half a day sharing their practices, even across different industries. And it just sparks a lot of insights and a lot of aha moments where people say, well, we're not exactly like that, but we could take that approach and put that in our business.
Even things like hands-free orders and the reduction of paper and managing the demand signal through the network. I was working with a procurement organization that was redesigning for value, and they hadn't really tracked the number of hands-free orders, and they weren't aware that their average order changed 3 times, and that caused people to have a lot of waste on work in process. And they didn't own the demand signal to their suppliers. And so when we talk about designing for value, I just think great things happen. And I love the fact that we're getting this to be more around the value chain. Well, John, one of the things we measured in the study was measurement. And again, we find that energy usage is the easiest thing for people to measure. So it's both important and people feel like they're making a lot of progress on it, and it's easy to track. Water, is not as easy to track. Waste is less, and then we get down to carbon footprint. Does this surprise you at all, John, in terms of, where we're at here in the measurement of the inputs?
No, it doesn't really surprise me a lot. I mean, energy usage is, as you said, easier to measure and easier to put a dollar value on. And truthfully, it relates, very directly to carbon footprint most often. And so to see energy usage higher than carbon footprint, that's not really surprising. Water is a very difficult issue, I think. I mean, energy and carbon, when we measure carbon, carbon is sort of equal all around the world. So talking about a CO2 equivalent is consistent no matter where you are. When you start talking about measuring water, it's about impact on local watersheds. It's a very localized topic. So that's one reason that it has context that's very different from CO2. And the other thing is water is too cheap, right? I mean, it's a very, very inexpensive compared to its value. So, if you're looking at sort of the California, the inland California and the growing season this year, water is extremely valuable, but it still doesn't have a price. So that, hopefully changes, but that also is a difficult thing to measure.
Yeah, we've sort of taken it for granted, and when we look at the year-over-year study, we find that people on average have about 5 goals. It's not that different between 2013 and 2014, and energy rates at the top, and then waste, and then carbon, and water. But down at the bottom, John, where we get into labor and fair trade, we see that this is measured less frequently. Any thoughts here?
Well, I think it probably has to do more with, industry-specific measurements as well. So, if you're in the technology, hardware industry, labor practices is going to be up on that, much higher up on the list. And, some companies like HP and others through consortiums such as the electronics industry, code of conduct, have really done a lot of great work in that area. I'm not sure in some of the process industries that fair labor is as an important an issue, and the same may be for conflict minerals. So I think if we had more sort of slicing of different industries, we might see a rearrangement of some of the things on the list.
Yeah, we tend to see it more in the apparel industry and the discrete industries. But we do have process companies that have outsourced 30% of manufacturing, and some of those labor practices have caused them some problems. But overall, not a lot of change in the study. And if we look at a different view, which just allows us to look at where we're doing well, both it's important and our performance is high, and where we aren't doing so well around recycled content, kind of demanufacturing and remanufacturing and the management of that life cycle of recycling. Any thoughts there, John?
Well, yeah, you know, the recycled content part is really a great place to find opportunity. I mean, Caterpillar created a multi-billion-dollar division just remanufacturing their products. I mean, this was just found money for them to figure out, hey, instead of these machines going off to digger heaven, you know, we can take them back, remanufacture engines, remanufacture the core of the machine, and resell it and be more profitable. And I think as companies look further up the, you know, going back into design and creating criteria that says we want more recycled content. I mean, HP is making parts of their printers out of recycled print heads and printer cartridges but you have to decide up front, way back up in the supply chain at the design phase, that we're going to figure a way to be able to demanufacture the product and then use those materials into new products. And so the thinking, as you were saying earlier, has to be more holistic.
Yeah, and that holistic thinking, I think, is a great opportunity. You know, when I find it interesting that, you know, we find recycled content to be one of the areas where we aren't doing so well. And if we look at the brand claims or where people are making claims, they're actually doing a lot of marketing claims around recycled content in both studies, 2013 and 2014. And so, you know, that makes me wonder if that's a risk factor for some companies that, you know, we may be marketing that we're doing a good job, but really underneath the covers we aren't. And, you know, this is an opportunity, I think, for the design for value. Any surprises here, John?
Not surprises. I think definitely in B2B that recyclable and containing recycled content is definitely an important thing. And it's getting into, as I mentioned earlier, getting into a lot of RFPs. If you look at sort of carpet industry, if you look at the furniture industry, they've been on this race to the top of recyclability and recycling their products because businesses have been taught to demand it. And then you have something like the U.S. Green Building Council giving you points for your LEED classification for your building if you're using a certain amount of products that have recycled content and being able to be recycled. So I think you've got, you know, examples of where an industry, you know, architects and builders are driving through a nonprofit organization like the U.S. Green Building Council, driving demand down to the manufacturers who have to, you know, meet that and compete at being more recyclable, more recycled content, more energy efficient.
Yeah, I just find it ironic, John, that, you know, the thing that we do the worst on measuring is the thing that we tend to take to a marketing claim, right? And I think, again, this is an opportunity for supply chain leaders to make a greater impact around the value chain and how can we design for value. And, you know, I love your case study of HP, and they're going to be talking more at the conference. And IBM was a leader on demanufacturing early on, and, you know, I'm doing some work with Caterpillar. I love that example. But I think more and more we've got to think about how do we recycle end to end, and not just the manufacturing processes to put things together, but the manufacturing processes for demanufacturing and kind of cradle to grave. So, you know, then we get to how are we working together, right? And when we ask the sustainability team about their understanding of supply chain, we find that the sustainability team thinks they understand supply chain better than the supply chain team understands sustainability. Now, John, we've seen this in both of the studies, both 2013 and 2014. And when I ask leaders to give me their perspective on this, this is what they tell me. They say that sustainability team may think they know supply chain, but they question it because they think they may have a cursory understanding of it. But they also tell me that they wish that they had greater clarity, that sometimes the corporate sustainability goals are too high of a level and aren't really brought down at a definitional level to make them executable. And I think there's an opportunity here. Your perspective?
Well, I think there's two things. I'll sort of take what you said and go in reverse order. I think sometimes sustainability groups can be their own worst enemies because they choose a language to communicate that may not resonate at all with supply chain or other groups within the organization. So when you talk about going carbon neutral or reducing greenhouse gases, that may not mean anything to a supply chain executive, but when you talk about reducing energy consumption, reducing fuel consumption in a fleet, they understand that inherently. And so we always counsel and coach sustainability executives that you almost have to consider yourself not a CSO, not a Chief Sustainability Officer, but you need to consider yourself to be a Chief Translation Officer. And so you need to learn the language of each group that you're going to talk to, because when you talk to product designers, you're going to talk a different language than when you talk to supply chain executives. And you just need to, use their language and communicate, in that language to achieve your goals. So often we tell them, rather than taking your sustainability goals to the supply chain group, first find out what their goals are and then show them how working with you can help them achieve those goals that they have, because, supply chain executive has, the three top goals, right, which is cost and non-time delivery and quality, and after that it gets, less impactful when you're goal number 4. So the idea is, to get more involved with them at their language. The other thing I would say is we're seeing a lot more companies embed a sustainability role within the supply chain organization. And I think that's going to be a trend we see increasing more and more over the next couple of years.
I do too. In fact, we're doing some research right now on supply chain centers of excellence, and we're starting to see sustainability embedded in supply chain centers of excellence, which I find exciting. And I love your concept of the Chief Translating Officer. I think that's really wonderful wisdom. Thanks for sharing that. And, when push comes to shove, John, in both years, we find that when companies have to make a choice between supply chain goals of cost or fulfillment or sustainability goals around planet and what's happening with recyclables, that the supply chain goals come first. And, John, one of the things I'd love to see is see them get equal priority, but, we're still a long ways away from that. Any thoughts here?
Well, I think the important thing, and sort of what I was talking about earlier, is I think it's incumbent on the sustainability organization to understand those supply chain goals and show how they can contribute to meeting those goals. As we see sustainability get more integrated into the business, then maybe this distinction, it's not going to go away, but maybe it won't become as important because the supply chain goals are the sustainability goals.
Yeah, and that's my hope, John, is that we can move to an and condition. And I would love to continue the dialogue with the folks on the phone. We don't have any Q&A today. John, you've been a great partner to help us with the survey, and we will be having a report on the final survey that we'll publish in our newsletter in 2 weeks. And my thoughts and prayers are with Keith Holliday today in the hospital. I think hopefully he'll make it just fine and join us at our conference. And as we get ready for our conference, corporate sustainability is a major theme in our conference, Imagine. September 10th and 11th at the Phoenician in Scottsdale, Arizona. Would love to see people there. John's got a great panel. John, any last words as we close here today for people?
I'd say I'm very excited about your upcoming conference, so I'm looking forward to whoever attends that. You know, I'll be around and happy to talk with you. But I would say, you know, find some time to sit down and have lunch with your sustainability group and say, hey, you know, here's what my goals are. Do you think you can help me with them? And you may be surprised by what you learn.
You know, John, we do have a last question about how to encourage customers to purchase green. And I think that's going to be one of our panels discussions with HP and Cisco. But I find more and more there's more pressure on manufacturing companies for their end users to buy green. Any thoughts about the question that we have?
Yeah, I think in the B2B world, there's a lot of focus on green procurement, and that's being driven by, you know, government requirements, the GSA having greener requirements than that. When it comes to consumers, it's much more challenging. I think anyone who can figure out how to get consumers who will say that they want to purchase green but don't actually purchase green, any way to move consumers would be you'd be a billionaire consulting to Unilever, Procter & Gamble, McDonald's, and everyone. But I think in the B2B space, we're seeing more and more focus on environmental and social issues coming into RFPs where, you know, 10 years ago this was almost unheard of.
Yeah, I agree. Well, would like to continue to have people to hang in there with us. We have the book Metrics That Matter that's publishing in November that will include corporate sustainability goals and look at the metrics that matter and the evolution. And we've got a lot happening here at Supply Chain Insights. We've got a webinar series on the countdown for our global summit, and we will be talking more about the main topics of the summit in our webinars: corporate social responsibility, talent, analytics in the countdown to the summit. And we'll also be giving insights on the Supply Chain Index, which is a way to measure supply chain improvement. And then at our summit, we'll be launching the top 20 supply chains that we admire. And as we get ready for the summit, we will be capturing all of our speakers at the summit on our podcast series. It's available on iTunes and on Stitcher. And John Davies just finished the last podcast with us. We now have over 100 podcasts, and we will continue to capture the voice of the supply chain leader. I'd love to have you join us at the summit, continue to have us join with us in the conversation on our webinars. You can find me on Forbes, on my Supply Chain Shaman blog, and also on LinkedIn as a LinkedIn influencer. And John, thank you so much for joining us today and being a great partner. This is Laura.
Thank you, Laura. And I look forward to seeing you in Phoenix.
Awesome. Thank you. Bye now.